Bom dia a todos, sejam bem-vindos a esta nossa sessão da COI, Coligação pela Integridade Organizacional. I'm going to change to English so that I make sure that everyone can get what we're talking about here. So welcome everyone to this session from the Coalition for Organizational Integrity. We launched the coalition on the 30th June here in Mozambique. So it's a coalition based here in Mozambique that we work with the TEI. We have been so far running every month best practice sessions, and this will be our first subforum session on the oil and gas sector. And I would like to actually, this forum, what we intend to do is to have a sub-forum to discuss issues on the sector regarding ethical issues. So, but I'm going to now introduce to you Dion Rousseau, who will give us even better. It's my privilege to introduce to you Professor Dion Rousseau, the Chief Executive Director of the Ethics Institute and extraordinary professor in philosophy at the University of Stellenbosch. Dion is an international recognized expert in business ethics and the ethics of corporate governance. He currently serves on the King's Committee for Corporate Governance in South Africa. Thank you, Dion, for moderating and leading our discussion this morning.
Fernanda, good morning to you as well. Great to see you. I hope you can see the slides that I've just shared there. Yes, I can see you are nodding, Fernanda. So good to see you again. It has been great to collaborate with you over the last 5 years already. And I look forward to this session. It is intended to be a small session. So it is a very intimate conversation that we will be having this morning. But just by way of background, before I introduce you to our two panelists this morning, just some background to this specific event and also to the bigger project of which it forms part. And the bigger project is called Collective Action for Advancing Business Integrity in Mozambique. And I'll tell you more about that in a moment. But let me start by first telling you something about the Ethics Institute, or TEI, or you would heard Fernanda refer to TEI. So we go by many different names, but as the Ethics Institute, our vision is building ethical societies. So by doing, or in our endeavor to build an ethical society, we always focus on organizations, because we believe that if you can build ethical organizations, they become the cornerstone of a broader ethical society. We are involved in 5 types of activities, as you can see there in the Pentagon. The first one is thought leadership, where we make available resources on organizational ethics for free to the public. And if you go to our website, which is just tei.org.za, you will find a lot of free resources there. But as part of our thought leadership role, we also advocate for ethical standards when it comes to organizations. And that also explains, for example, why I sit on the King Committee for Corporate Governance, which develops standards for organizations on the governance of ethics. Then our second activity is ethics training. We have training programs for boards of directors, for subcommittees of boards, for executive management. But our flagship program is a training program where we train and certify people to be ethics officers. In other words, those people responsible for managing ethics in organizations. Then our third activity is to conduct ethics assessments. And there we developed our own instruments like ethics risk assessments, ethical culture assessments, ethics management assessments, and we do that for organizations in both the public sector, the private sector, and also for professional associations. Our fourth activity is advisory services, And that is basically where organizations approach us and ask our assistance regarding any aspect of managing or governing ethics in their organizations. Finally, we also develop products that people can use to support their ethics program. And this includes apps, training videos, but also software for managing ethics in organizations. So just by way of background, this is who the Ethics Institute is. And we have been involved in Mozambique now for the last 6 years as part of the Siemens Integrity Initiative. That is an initiative that grew out of a settlement between Siemens and the World Bank in 2009, after they have been convicted of corruption, Siemens in Germany, but also in other countries around the world. Part of the settlement is that they would make available $100 million that should be used to promote anti-corruption collective action and also capacity building to fight corruption. And we were fortunate that we received grants from the Siemens Integrity Initiative over all the funding rounds. We are now in the final of 3 funding rounds. On the second round, we received funding for a 5-year project in Mozambique focused on collective action, capacity building, and specifically cross-border anti-corruption interventions in Mozambique. Currently, we are in the final funding round, and our 5-year project now focuses on collective action for advancing business integrity in Mozambique. Because at the Ethics Institute, we believe the best way of fighting corruption is not to fight corruption, but to build ethical organizations that are resilient to corruption, but also to other forms of unethical behavior. Now, the big focus of this current 5-year project is the Coalition for Organizational Integrity that Fernanda also referred to in her opening statement. And there we have 3 main objectives. The first objective is to establish and maintain a collective action coalition for organizational integrity in Mozambique. This has been established, it has been launched, and it already had its first sessions as well. And in these sessions, we typically share best practice around any aspect of the governance and management of ethics in order to build ethical cultures in organizations. The second objective is to build ethics and anti-corruption capacity for small and medium enterprise suppliers. In other words, we look at the supply chain of the members of this coalition for organizational integrity, and we assist these SMEs, the small and medium enterprises, to develop ethics management capacity and to make sure that they aren't involved in corruption. The final objective is to build ethics management capacity within the Coalition for Organizational Integrity. And there we do a number of things, such as doing assessments of ethics risk and ethical culture in these organizations, but also assisting them in enhancing their ethics management. Now, closer to home, we want to talk about this morning session, and there the objective is to establish and maintain a collective action coalition, as I already said, and there are 2 activities here. The first activity is to host best practice sharing sessions. We have started doing this, it works quite well, and people find a lot of value around these best practice sharing sessions. But then the second activity of the coalition is to establish a sub-forum working group within specifically the oil, gas, and energy sector, since it is such a key sector in the Mozambican economy, and since there are so many developments there. And the whole idea of the sub-forum is that we want to bring representatives of both the public and the private sector within this industry together to identify and address issues related to doing business with integrity within the oil, gas, and energy sector. The outcomes that we are aiming for over the next 5 years is, first of all, the establishment of a forum working group, which is exactly what we are doing this morning. And we want to invite you to become part of this working group. It will be a small working group. We don't want a huge body. We want a really active working group consisting of 7 to 9 members. Then we will host 2 sub-forum working group sessions annually. Twice a year, we will come together and talk about a specific challenge or specific solutions or new developments related to business integrity. And then the working group, in the meantime, will, on an ongoing basis, identify certain outcomes and certain actions that they think should be tackled within the oil, gas, and energy sector. And then on an annual basis, there will be a regionally represented dialogue addressing action items identified by the working group. So I hope this gives you a sense of why we have this meeting and this important kickoff to this initiative that will run over the next 4 years. Now we come to the interesting part of the morning, where we want to have a conversation about the role of the oil, gas, and energy industry in strengthening business integrity in Mozambique. You can see once again, it's about strengthening the integrity of business, specifically in this sector. And we are very fortunate to have 2 panelists with us, Florival Mukave and Ivania Madaka. And let me tell you something more about both of them. Let's start with Florival then. He's the chairman of the Mozambican Oil and Gas Chamber and also chairman of Janice Oil and Gas Limited. He's a senior independent consultant for the De Beers Group and for Anglo American PLC in Africa. He founded Janice Oil and Gas Mozambique, an oil and gas consulting company aimed at providing legal and corporate finance services to oil and gas companies operating across Africa. Florival obtained his LLB at the University of Geneva in Switzerland and concluded the LLM in corporate and commercial law at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Florival, very warm good morning to you once more, and thank you for your participation. Then our second panelist is Ivania Madaka. Ivania is a qualified accountant with over 12 years experience in both accounting and auditing roles, having worked both in South Africa and Mozambique. She holds an honors Bachelor of Commerce in Accounting and Audit degree from UNISA, and her current position is Senior Manager Finance at Sasol. She leads a team of 17 people focused on operations in Mozambique, where she covers everything from transactional accounting services, complex financial reporting at group level, and also joint venture reporting to various Sasol partners. So good morning to you also, Ivania, and looking forward to your contribution as well. So can I start? And Florival, if you don't mind picking on you to kick off proceedings here, can I ask you for your perception of the current role of the oil gas industry in Mozambique when it comes to business integrity? In other words, how is this sector, the oil, gas, and energy sector, seen in Mozambique when it comes specifically to good governance and ethical business practices?
Thank you very much, Dion, not only for your very succinct and brief introduction, but also for giving me the opportunity and to represent the Mozambican Oil and Gas Chamber in this specific webinar, or like you said, intimate meeting. Insofar as the oil industry is concerned, which I have to start by saying that although Sasol has been operating in Mozambique for a longer, and if I'm not wrong, from 2004, 2003, around there, Mozambique was not seen and perceived as an oil and gas destination as yet. So we had one small operation, I think, which is the Sasol Pandetemani, 2 TCFs, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, it allowed us to somehow start understanding the intricacies and the complexities of the oil and gas industry, but in a very smaller scale. The discoveries at the Rovuma Basin, I mean, we're talking about approximately 200 TCF. Those are very big discoveries. And that positioned Mozambique has one of the 5 biggest discoveries worldwide. And of course, if we look at the past of the oil and gas industry, we can say that there have been innumerable challenges, particularly in the African continent, insofar as corruption and ethics are concerned. I'm of the opinion that it is not relevant at this junction for us to dwell on what happened in the past and where. I think the learnings are there. We have to look at the countries that are oil and gas producers worldwide, look at their experiences, positive and negative, and learn from there. If you look, for instance, at the investors in Mozambique today, insofar as the oil and gas industry is concerned, you have, for instance, Total, which is a French company. Total is fortunately a public company, what means that it's registered in the stock exchange. And the rules of the International Stock Exchange are quite stringent today, insofar as ethics and corruption are concerned. We have ExxonMobil, the American company, and we know that the American anti-corruption and anti-bribery laws are extremely stringent insofar as American companies are concerned and the activities outside of the United States. So we can say that actually that there's something called the extraterritorial application of American anti-bribery and anti-corruption laws insofar as American companies are concerned. So we are quite comfortable with the fact that those companies that we mentioned, the companies that are the main investors in Mozambique, notwithstanding the fact that we don't have as yet very stringent rules and regulations in Mozambique, we are comfortable with the fact that the companies that we have as investors that are listed internationally are bound by very strict rules and regulations of the International Stock Exchange. Therefore, it gives us not only the comfort that Mozambique will not be one more country that will be subjected to certain practices simply because of an absence of very stringent rules and regulations. Of course, if you have been following the evolution of Mozambican legislation insofar as corruption is concerned, you'll realize that there's been a quite remarkable evolution actually of late. We have ethics rules and laws. We have now what we call the principles of non-conflict or conflict for politicians and parliamentarians. There's a new proposal of a piece of legislation that will have to do with all the, I will say, the assets that may have been acquired by corrupt means to be taken by the state or by the prosecutor. So we do have a series of regulations, rules, and legislation that has been enacted and will be enacted in Mozambique that hasn't been tested as yet.
Okay.
And I think the challenge is always in testing the legislation and its applicability.
Okay.
And that's why I want to bring this intersection between what we have in Mozambique, which is really at its inception in terms of rules and regulations applying to ethics and anti-corruption, particularly in an industry which is very new to us, which is the oil and gas industry, and also bring what we have internationally that bounds the investors in Mozambique and that gives us comfort at this stage to say that they will not come to Mozambique and voluntarily engage in practices that may have very severe consequences on the companies and their directors where they come from.
Okay, I think you make a very valid point, almost about a combined assurance model in a somewhat different context, where you have extraterritorial legislation. Your main players are listed on stock exchanges around the world that are highly regulated, plus your own domestic laws and also developments. And we are quite aware of all these developments recently around the prevention of corruption. Ivania, can I bring you in here as well? As Florival said, you are one of the oldest players when it comes to this specific sector in Mozambique. What is your perception of the integrity within this sector, the business integrity within this sector in Mozambique, also now that there are more new players joining Sasol in Mozambique?
Can you hear me? I lost you guys for a moment there.
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So, as Florival said as well, there's a lot of new players that have come into the market since Sasol, where I work for, has joined. So a lot has changed. The playground, as we say, has completely changed. And what we thought it was proper governance and compliance may not be it is not what the other players will bring to the table as well. So as an industry, it's very important that these new entities that are coming in, these multi-billionaire companies that are coming in, that they bring in that knowledge, that enforcement, and ensure that the rules and regulations are followed by all. Being registered on the New York Stock Exchange as a company, it puts a lot of pressure on a company like Sasol. But I must say, having other players in and around the country also contributed to that increase in pressure. We've seen in the past 5 years our ethics and governance and compliance areas being beefed up. Top leadership has been beefed up as well to make sure that we comply and that we abide by the rules and regulations. However, Mozambique being a country that is not as yet, or we do not have a culture of such, it's still growing within us as a people as well. It's going to take time for all of this to be embedded and implemented across the industry. But you see the change. You see the effort of the big companies or the industry getting together to make sure that those rules and regulations are abided by.
Okay, great. Can I follow up with you, Ivania? You know, when you move to a different context, there are always contextual challenges, things that are out of your control to which you need to adapt. I think the current COVID pandemic just shows us again how there are external factors, and we simply have to respond to those factors and find a way of coping with them. If you look at the Mozambican context, what would you say are unique challenges within that context that a company like Sasol face? And Florival, I want to get to you to the same question, but in a more generic sense. But let's start with Ivania on this one.
For Sasol, definitely is the novelty of it. So the contracts that the public sector or the government of Mozambique has entered with Sasol and other entities as well, they mostly new. You would say that they've never been implemented before in Mozambique. So making sure that the compliance and the governance of those contracts are followed by both the public sector and the private sector, it's sometimes a challenge, and it can be perceived that some of the times as companies not being compliant, or there's misunderstandings, or you're not following the regulations. There's a lot that is happening that has never been done before in Mozambique. So finding that balance between the public sector and the private sector, that yes, we are transparent, we are trying to do the right thing, we want to be transparent, but it's not always seen as that, because we just don't have the experience from the public sector or from the private sector as well. These are huge companies, they are in the country, yes, but the knowledge, the build up of from an ethical perspective, from a compliance perspective, it's still building up, and it's up to these companies to make sure that that it gets implemented. But we between public and private companies, we just need to be on the same page. Yeah.
Okay, and Florival, from your perspective, what do you see as the unique challenges that these giant companies have to face that is probably a bit new to them, that is maybe somewhat different from other markets in which they operate, and that can, for that reason, pose challenges to them? You're just muted, Florival. Florival, you're muted.
Chris, I would say that one of the major challenges faced by those companies in Mozambique is the institutional capacity from the government side. Because although we have the pieces of legislation that they just mentioned, and I have to say that actually some of our pieces of legislation are first world legislation, because we got international experts from the World Bank and elsewhere to come and assist us in crafting and drafting legislation. But how capable are we of implementing the legislation that we have? And I'm talking about monitoring and the institutional capacity to implement the legislation. So oftentimes, international companies will come and invest in Mozambique, but then they will have the challenge of having to sit periodically with the Mozambican authorities and explain exactly what they're doing, how they're doing it, and what are the objectives of what they're doing. And if you come to a country that doesn't have a culture of oil and gas, that is going through the learning curve, that doesn't have the institutional capacity, it's very frustrating at times to them. But it's also very frustrating to the government, on the other hand, simply because these companies come with lots of experience. So just give you an example, what one would call recoverable costs. What in other countries, oil producing countries, you call cost oil. In a country like Mozambique, the concept of recoverable costs, the ones that actually are recovered from the taxes that the companies are supposed to pay, it's one that hasn't yet been understood fully by the Mozambican enforcers. And when I said by the Mozambican enforcers, I'm talking about our government. And we cannot blame the government for that. the issue that we're facing is the institutional capacity to be able to unpack these concepts and understand exactly what is a cost recoverable, what is not, and negotiate what would be acceptable as cost recoverable and what would not be acceptable. Because at the very end of the day, if we talk about what is revenue for the government of Mozambique in the next years, we're talking about taxes.
Mm.
So if these companies are not paying those taxes because certain, I would say, investments are cost recoverable, then where are the real benefits for the country? So I would say that one of the biggest challenges really is the institutional capacity to engage, negotiate, and monitor most of the aspects of this new industry into Mozambique.
Okay, thank you. And it's good to see that there's consensus between the two of you that this is one of the big challenges. Recently, we've also read a lot about armed conflict, especially in the northern part of Mozambique. And we know that whenever companies operate within a context of armed conflict, there's a host of ethical issues that all of a sudden comes over and above all the other issues that you have to face. Would any of you like to comment on that and specific challenges, ethical challenges that companies face in this regard? Florival, do you want to go first?
I'll leave it first to Ivania, who's representing a company.
Okay, let's start with you, Ivania.
Yeah, ladies first. So I hear you, Dion. The conflict, especially in the north. For me, from an ethical perspective, I see the conflict. Oh, if I was in Totals or any other companies acting in the north, there's definitely some ethical. You need to find the balance between: do I stay in the country with this, with what is going on there? How do I contribute, or am I contributing as a company for that? For that to continue or not? Are we enablers of what's happening on the north? So there is a lot of from a company perspective that you can be judged on as being ethical or not regarding what's happening on the north. It is challenging times. I would like to see in the next 3 to 5 years what happens to the companies acting in the north and how they're going to deal with that conflict and how they're going to remain ethical and also act in the benefit of the country as well.
Yeah. And Florival, I'm very curious to also get your take on this.
Well, when we talk about the North and we talk about the insurgents, I have to say that is a new dart that was thrown to the table. And question is, how do we deal with it? How do we deal with the fact that the north of Mozambique, particularly Cabo Delgado, it has these massive reserves of gas, international scale, if I may say. And at the same time, there is a military insurgency in the same area. And how, as a foreign investor, do you continue investing in a transparent, ethical manner without any involvement whatsoever with the matters of the conflict? I don't think it's an easy one. And honestly speaking, I think that it's becoming more and more difficult for the IOCs or the oil and gas investors to act in a very equidistant manner act simply as international investors that came to Mozambique to invest in the oil and gas industry, defending the interest of the shareholders, produce the oil and gas and sell it to international markets. From the moment that you have a conflict, you will have to look at other aspects of your investment. Security is a big aspect today. The costs of the security. And how do you make sure that, how do you ensure the safety of your people without being involved with the local issues? So it's a challenge. It is a big challenge for the IOCs. I haven't seen so far any involvement of IOCs, but simply an agreement with the government whereby the IOC said, listen, we need protection. We need to protect these areas where we're working. We need the government to work jointly with us, which is normal in any country, because it is the role of government to protect the people. It is the role of government to protect the investments. So the IOCs will have to rely on the government to protect them.
Yeah.
Of course, it has to be done in a manner that doesn't infringe the ethical principles that govern those international companies and the stock exchange where they come from. So the issue of operating in an ethical manner in a situation of insurgency or war is a new challenge to Mozambique. And one that we have to look at.
Yeah, it's a huge challenge, and we've seen it elsewhere in the world. We've seen it in the DRC as well. And that is why one of the first principles of the Global Compact principles talks about not being complicit in human rights abuses, because you can be caught so easily in the crossfire between the struggling parties there. And I'm quite sure this is one of the issues that will be picked up by this working group going forward. But can I ask each of you, and Ivania, I'm going to start with you again. Florival, you also mentioned this extraterritorial legislation like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, but also the UK Bribery Act, that also makes you responsible for corruption in your supply chain. In other words, you can't outsource corruption to your supply chain. You are held responsible also for corruption, especially in small and medium enterprises, which don't always have the capacity and the governance structures and management structures to address corruption and ethics in the organization. Ivania, from a Sasol perspective, what do you do to strengthen business integrity in your supply chain, and specifically when it comes to your SME suppliers?
Okay, so for us, one of the big things is having the adequate leadership at the right for the need that for each need. So having adequate leadership in this area, in supply chain, in governance and in compliance, has helped us tremendously in making sure that we have the right resources to be able to monitor and help small and medium enterprises. We have as well, from a Sasol perspective, ensure that every single supplier that comes into our books has gone through a due diligence. Like you said, we cannot outsource corruption. We cannot be seen as doing dealings with companies that do or are involved in corruption. So it has been a long road for Sasol in terms of training and ensuring that every single supplier, medium, small or large, that comes into our books has gone through a due diligence that is approved by our standards, and the continuous training within Sasol, not just in the supply chain department, but across all the departments and functions, to ensure that we understand what are the responsibilities of Sasol as an employee, as an employer, and pass that through to these vendors as well. It's been very difficult in terms of small and medium enterprises because they do not have, some of them don't even have the knowledge. It's a long journey to explain to a very small company in Nyambane what is FCPA, or how will it affect it, or how will it affect Sasol if it's found dealing with if you found with corrupt dealings. But it's a process. We are getting there. We have a local content plan that includes training the small entities into ensuring that they understand what FCPA is, how does it affect them, how does it affect SASOL, how does it affect Mozambique by continuing to deal in corrupt actions. But I personally feel having the adequate leadership in SASOL that deals with governance and compliance, and passing that through to supply chain and the different departments, ensuring that the trainings and the ethical champions and guys that deal specifically with this are not just a tick box. They really are proper and technically trained to deal with situations like this. And we've had in the past, you've had companies approaching SASOL saying, how can we get this fast? How can you track fast? And it's a culture, isn't our culture, that people will just approach you because they know you or something like that and say, how can we make this faster? And you have to remove yourself and say, no, this is not how we do business. This is not going to help the country. This is not going to help SASOL. You really need to move on from that place.
Okay. And Florival, looking at it from a sector-wide perspective, do you see encouraging developments here around companies and their interaction with local suppliers?
I have to say that I mean, it's encouraging to see some of the developments that are taking place and took place. Last year, or 2 years ago rather, before Total took over from Anadarko organized a seminar on the US anti-bribery laws.
Okay.
And the objective of that Anadarko seminar was precisely to inform and synthesize the Mozambican entrepreneurs and small and medium enterprises of what they call the business ethics that are a basic requirement in dealings with them. So what we need today in Mozambique is a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift, and at the chamber, at the Mozambican Oil and Gas Chamber, we are starting this training course that we call From Agent to Entrepreneur. Because when we look at the business community in Mozambique, we realize that the concept of entrepreneur is more of an agent, what in South Africa you would call a tenderpreneur.
Okay.
People look for tenders, they apply for tenders, they win the tenders, and they make money. Some more legally than others. But the cornerstone of the entrepreneurship class in Mozambique today is based on that, on the agency. So our objective is really to start dealing with the young entrepreneurs and with small and medium enterprises and take them through the journey that they have to go through from agents to entrepreneurs. And allow them to understand that they need to be that paradigm shift for them to be able to be acceptable vendors to SASOL, to Exxon, to Total, and all these other international companies.
Okay, great. And I think it's a great initiative. I would love to hear more about that. I would, at this point, like to open the conversation. Celia, may I invite you in and just say something, since we are talking now about SME development, to share a bit about the EASY program. It's a program that we started that also forms part of this initiative in Mozambique. And EASY stands for Ethically Aware Supplier Induction. And maybe this might be of interest to the rest of the group as well.
Certainly. Thank you, Dion, for the opportunity. Yes, so Florival, I'm really delighted to hear the approach that you are taking to build that capacity, which is always needed in all kind of elements of business. And I think the program that Dion is referring to is focusing on the suppliers to large companies. And this course actually addresses several of the international regulatory elements in a way that's digestible for SMEs. In other words, it's not in a language or in a format that's complicated, and it's an animated online program. We are at the moment, we are in the process of translating this, and it's exciting because we should be able to avail this online platform for training the SMEs early 2021. And I would love to hear your opinion on it. So I will avail this program to you as soon as you tell me you're ready to take a look and kind of see how it could benefit your program that you are offering. And this invitation goes to any of our other participants today as well. But yeah, so EASY focuses on 4 core elements basically, and it is, you know, treating employees fairly, the responsibility towards the environment, doing business with integrity basically, and also the responsibility towards society, towards your community. So those are the 4 core elements that we are kind of discussing in this training session. Any questions, you're welcome to post on that, Dion. Thank you.
Okay, great. Can I hear from Fatima and Barbara or Fernanda any specific questions that you have to our panel?
Yes, please. I just have a question in terms of the awareness of the coalition. Sorry, I've got a vested interest here amongst the role players in the oil and gas sector, because obviously we've had discussions with Sasol, but should there be other organizations attending, we would be very keen to work with them as the coalition. Obviously the coalition is something that benefits all multinationals, but really my interest is to have these key companies that have really super top reputations to contribute and to participate actively in the coalition. Is this something that the companies represented here today would be interested in?
Sorry, was that Fatima?
It was Barbara.
Oh, sorry, Barbara. Didn't get. So definitely, I think the major companies have gotten together for other purposes. The currently AMOPI association is an example of that. So definitely, I don't see why a company like Sasol or any other company would not be interested or being part of the coalition. I think there's only benefits into the for Mozambique and to the industry as well.
Thank you, Ivania. I have one person that I want to call out, and please forgive me, Professor Makwane. If I may, Jose, I know that you guys have done some extensive research, or actually your partner at MAP has done that in this sector. Do you have any insights that you'd like to share? Sorry, Dion. I just saw his name on the list. Yeah. So yeah. I want to put Jose on the spot and see if he would like to make any contributions.
I wonder if Shane elevated him to a panelist.
Yeah, Shane, could you just elevate Jose Makwane for me, please?
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry, which one? Just spell it for me.
JJ?
JJ, Makwane. There we go. Okay, JJ, there we go. Got it. Thank you. There we go, JJ.
Ah, there we can see it. Professor, did you get that question? I see you are still muted.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes.
And welcome.
Thank you, Professor Dion, and also Celia for promoting me. And I would like to thank for the wonderful insights that we got from the panelists today. It was really inspiring. Well, actually, I think that I would rather take this opportunity to make questions instead of giving some inputs here. I just wanted to ask to the panelists. I know that Florival has been one of the few vocal entrepreneurs about how the entrepreneurs have serious ethical issues, and also in the way they participate in the oil and gas supply chain, value chain, and also related to the issues of the local content and how it would be. My question to Florival is, taking into account all these contextual elements that you know very well, and you have been vocal and made a lot of criticism to it. What do you think that your chamber and other actors in the sector can do to make things better than they are? Because this is not only a conjunctural problem, it's a structural problem of how entrepreneurs actually relate to the big business and big economic opportunities in the country. So I would like to hear a little bit more about this. And to Ivania, I would like to hear a little bit more about the experience of Sasol of dealing with the supply chain. Exactly in this environment where there are those tender periods, as Florival mentioned, and also because most of the opportunities that are in the business, as we know, are also heavily influenced by political ties. And obviously Sasol to some extent has to learn how to navigate in this environment. So I would like to know a little bit more, what is your experience and how you navigate in this complex environment, and still you can do your job based on business ethics principles. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor. That's a great question. Florival, do you want to go first?
Okay. Yes, indeed. Here I am. Thank you very much, Professor Mokwane. I'm fully aware of the complexity of this local content concept and applicability in Mozambique. I would like to start by saying that as a chamber, our decision to have this training course for small and medium enterprises, from agent to entrepreneur, is a response to what we understand to be a very serious lack of understanding and of capacity in terms of skills. And I'll even say economic literacy from our small and medium companies. You know, there are certain things that one cannot separate, and they're totally intertwined. For one to be an entrepreneur, it's about running a company. And running a company involves ethics, involves savvy, involves discipline. There are certain issues that I call financial literacy. If you want to be a vendor, let's say, for Sasol, you need to have a company that has audited accounts, that has independent auditors, that has a certain experience in that specific sector, that makes you a credible company to be able to become a vendor for a company like Sasol, Exxon, and so on and so on. If we look at what have been the requirements in Mozambique in the past for a specific entrepreneur to apply for a specific tender, be it a government tender or any other tender. If you look at what were the obligations, these very crucial issues of audited accounts, independent auditors, experience, look at the management team, and so on, were not there. So the Mozambican entrepreneur, and that's what I said, that the bulk of what is today called Mozambican business community is unfortunately a group of people that grew their businesses based on tenders. And even when it comes to government tenders today, it's no longer acceptable to go and bid without having a company with the audited accounts, with independent auditors, with specific management team that is capable, and so on and so on. So that's why I'm talking about this paradigm shift. We need, as entrepreneurs in Mozambique, to go through a paradigm shift. That is one point. The second point is the understanding of what is local content. Local content is not rent seeking. It's totally divorced from rent seeking. Local content is making sure that these exhaustible resources that we have in Mozambique, that we call gas today, we know that those resources are exhaustible. We know that in 30 years, the reserves, the big reserves in the Rovuma Basin may no longer be there. What will be left behind for the next generations to benefit from these resources that are ours? So we say that we need to make sure that there's training in place, there's capacity building in place, there's employment of Mozambicans in place, and there's participation of Mozambican entrepreneurs in these industries. And that per se will allow the creation of other industries secondary to the oil and gas industry, secondary to the LNG industry. And these other industries will allow the Mozambican government to benefit from taxes, will allow Mozambicans to grow as entrepreneurs, as de facto entrepreneurs, will allow the Mozambican economy to industrialize. Because if we look at what are all those other industries that are secondary to the oil and gas industry, we'll have methanol, GTL, fertilizers, and so on and so on. So it is very important for us to look at the oil and gas not only as a one sector, but as a holistic contribution to the Mozambican economy.
Okay.
Very, very
yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. That's a systemic view that it's part of a bigger society and must have a positive, lasting impact. Ivana, we are almost out of time. I'm going to give the last word to you, and then I'll just wrap up.
Yeah, so very quickly trying to answer the question that is on the Q&A as well as Dr. Mukavi's question. Just a little bit of a background. Sasol has been in Mozambique for the past 20 years. And over the years, we've seen the growth, there's a need for the growth of the local companies or the local content in Mozambique. Once we have identified that need, we also identified certain initiatives that needed to be done in order to grow that market and to grow that base of small and medium enterprise that we as SASO and the rest of the industry can also use for their needs. So through our local content plan as well, we've implemented a number of initiatives, including training, like Florival mentioned, the financial literacy that we actually do it in-house, as well as funding. We plan as part of our local plan as well, funding for the small and medium enterprises that can have access to funding at a very low rate. But to have access to all of those, you need to go through a very thorough process in terms of compliance and governance and ethical behavior, so that you know you're ready to take up these initiatives. So Sasol has done a great deal of initiatives to make sure that small and medium enterprises are ready to take not only business with Sasol, but with the rest of the country as well.
Okay, thanks, Ivania, and thank you for also addressing Juvita's question there. Thelma or Thelema, I'm going to apologize to you, Thelma, for not having time to address your question. We will see what we can do afterwards. But may I thank our two panelists this morning, Florival and Ivania. It was a truly enlightening experience. And thank you for the honesty and the frankness with which you shared your perspectives. I think this bodes very well for this working group going forward, addressing the issues that you have identified. And knowing Celia quite well as my colleague, you can be sure that she will follow up with you pretty soon on this. And I would like to wish Celia and her whole team only the best in this very, very important initiative. We look forward to the fruits of your labor. Celia, I'm going to give you the last word. So thank you once again, Ivania. Thank you, Florival. It was great. We appreciate your contributions and the time that you availed for us. Over to you, Celia.
Thank you. Thank you, Dion. Thank you to our honored panelists. We really appreciate your valuable contribution. And yes, indeed, unfortunately, once I have you on my contact list, I don't disappear. Jose is one example of it. I always kind of get back to him at some point. So, but thank you for the valuable discussion and a very important thing now for us to work together to really kind of strengthen the integrity initiative throughout the supply chain, throughout the whole process in Mozambique. And it's a privilege to have all of you on this call today. So we will follow up. Thelma will indeed kind of connect with you separately. I have your contact details and we'll talk about your question a bit and how we could potentially collaborate. So thank you again. And this is my last word. I'm signing off. Stay well, stay healthy, and we will be in touch very shortly. Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.